This video is now in session, and the Republicans absolutely failed 2022. They should have done a lot better than what we are expecting the results to be. As of now, we have the Senate going to the Democrats by 51 seats. That means that they gain a seat in this supposedly red wave year. In the state governorships, they they failed to capture crucial governorships in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and even Oregon. All of these were attainable, including Kansas and even Maine, but they missed the mark. They let the Democrats flip the Michigan state senate and the state house, and so as the state house in Pennsylvania. And in this video, we're going to talk about why Republicans failed in 2022. The first thing, I guess, that should be important is abortion. We like pundits, including myself. Well, I'm not really a pundit, but pundits have underestimated the effect that abortion would have on galvanizing the vote. If you look at the exit polls and see how many of those voters were younger voters, and then what drove those younger voters to actually vote, there was a gain in terms of young vote share going to the Democratic Party, and a lot of their motivations were related to abortions. Now, I have to say that I myself kind of underestimated the effect that abortion would have on elections. I knew it was an important issue, but as a male, as a male who's never had to deal with that kind of thing, I was practically ignorant of the issue, and that's why for states like Nevada, I rated it more Republican than it turned out to be, where abortion was a relevant issue in that state. So as Georgia and Kansas. If we look at, some of the special election results in New York's 19th district, abortion drove a lot of that to have Pat Ryan win in a Republican-leaning district. And even though Mark Molinaro did win in New York, which I'll get to later in this video, but even though he did win, it showed that the Democrats could actually capitalize on abortion even through to the midterm elections. And you also see that with Kansas's results, with an astounding 18% going towards the no vote. And if you look at all the other abortion measures that have happened in this election cycle in Kentucky, in California, Michigan, Vermont, all of them have, by pretty comfortable margins, gone towards in favor of pro-abortion movements. So that's, I would say, the first reason why Republicans just haven't done as well. It's because of the overturn of Roe v. Wade. But arguably, more importantly, candidate quality did matter, and that's something that we're hearing throughout this whole election cycle, or at least in the aftermath of the 2020 election cycle. But it's true. Candidate quality really drove some of these races with moderates and even light Republicans, small r Republicans, voting for the Democratic candidate. If you look at Pennsylvania's results, we expected Pennsylvania to be a lot more Republican than it turned out to be, in both the governorships and as well as the Senate races, House races, and even state House races. So, if you look here, the governor's races, we expected Josh Shapiro to win by likely margins. He did win by likely margins, but he won by 14.3 percentage points. That's only 0.7% away from a safe margin. That is incredible for a state like Pennsylvania, which voted for Biden by less than 2 points. And here you see counties like Beaver County, as well as Cumberland County, Dauphin County, Berks County. A lot of these counties have not voted Democratic in statewide elections for several years at this point. And yet, in this election, they chose to vote for Josh Shapiro because they viewed Mastriano as the limit to what they were comfortable with the Republican Party. Mastriano, he just focused on right-wing voters and conspiracy theories on the conservative side, and that alienated a bunch of voters even those who cared about the economy, even those who did not like the Democratic stance, the Democratic legislation that was done in 2021 with the American Rescue Plan, ultimately they voted for the Democratic Party because they viewed the Republican Party as too crazy to deal with these kinds of issues. And then you also have candidates like Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz, many people think that he was a good candidate. He was not a good candidate. The thing is, he's a TV star that comes from New Jersey. Even though New Jersey is right next to Pennsylvania, it is a contentious issue, and it is a valid issue for a lot of Pennsylvanians to kind of discredit Oz for being this outsider who came from New Jersey, an elitist state. And I'm from New Jersey, by the way, so I can say that. But yeah, he comes from an elitist state with a wealthy background, has no connections, no real connections to the working class voters of Pennsylvania, and they compare that to John Fetterman. John Fetterman, I mean, he's a crazy guy, but like he's crazy in a way that makes him populist with all the voters who feel forgotten. That is something that we keep underestimating in these elections. The forgotten voters, people who have worked in steel mills but have been fired or laid off because of a declining economy. John Fetterman represents those people because of his upbringing, because of his background as a mayor of of a town that was impacted by steel mill closures. And that's why you see for a lot of these counties that these counties are much more democratic, even in rural areas, compared to Joe Biden's win in 2020, where he mainly captured Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and their suburbs. Here you see that even in rural counties, it's not fully deep Republican territory anymore because John Fetterman has that kind of appeal, and Mehmet Oz was just not a good candidate. Obviously, Mastriano did impact Oz's ability to win because of down ballot vote casting, but even then, Oz still was, I mean, he was compared to like David McCormick. McCormick was a much better candidate than Oz in terms of his background. So that's just in one state, in Pennsylvania, but we can take this nationwide. If you look at the Arizona Senate race that's happening right now, Mark Kelly is ahead by Blake Masters by 6 percentage points, and although we think that this margin will narrow between now and when all the votes have been tabulated, in the end, at this point, we're ready to say that Mark Kelly won the state of Arizona. That's something that we couldn't say about Joe Biden at the same time just 2 years ago. And, that's because of Blake Masters. Blake Masters, in the Republican primary, he made himself a star by appealing to the conservative vote. But because he wasn't endorsed by Donald Trump and because he embraced the, I guess, more Freedom Caucus views, a lot of Arizonans just shut him out. And they viewed those kinds of candidates as too crazy to be in Washington. And that's why you see in Lauren Boebert's district, it's been this kind of a vote that we're seeing in Colorado has been brewing over the past several years. Many people haven't really talked about it, but ever since the 2020 election, a lot of Colorado, a lot of third district voters were tired of Lauren Boebert. They were tired that she was trying to be a more of a, I guess, a celebrity than a actual public servant, and that's why you saw in this election here Adam Frisk being so close to Boebert, even though we think she's gonna win in the end, it should not have been that close in an R+15 district. So why would people vote for the Democratic Party, you may ask? Because even though the Republican candidates were bad, economy is still a very big issue. But that's where voters put their line at. They had concerns. Voters had concerns about the economy. It was still the top issue of the midterms, but they felt that when you compare the actual Democratic candidates to the actual Republican candidates, it is much different than from perhaps the generic vote of a generic Democrat versus a generic Republican. Because a lot of the voters felt that the Republicans that were being chosen as the nominee for those individual races, that they were simply incompetent, that they weren't able to solve these economic issues that we're facing today. And more broadly, the GOP just didn't offer a strong alternative to the Democratic Party with inflation. Like, they said that inflation was the Democrats' fault, but like, if the Republicans were elected, what would they have done that Democrats would do differently after 2022? Because at this point, many moderate Democrats have learned their lesson. They've expressed that to voters. And even though you might not find that true, the majority of voters at this point, a lot of voters at this point think that for those kinds of moderate candidates, including Mark Kelly and Catherine Cortez Masto, that they got the message on the economy and that they can't continue to keep spending government money without trying to find a way to fund it. So that kind of dynamic between good Democratic moderates who were able to appeal to a broad base of voters, and then mix that with really bad Republican candidates, and I mean really bad. These are poor Republican candidates who just were not focusing enough on the economy until the final stretch of the election. And that's how we see this map today, where Republicans are just so close to losing the House. Even though we think that they'll win in the end, really just like 222 or like 223 Republican seats at most. That should not be that low. Really should not be that low. And Kevin McCarthy will certainly have a hard time governing with that kind of majority. So yeah, so I guess before I end this video, I know that there are some exceptions. I mean, right here, literally, the title is "New York gives the GOP a House majority." There are a few exceptions to this rule. Actually, it's not really like exceptions. It's actually support for the arguments that I'm making. New York, a lot of these House candidates that squarely focused on the economy and didn't focus that much on appealing to Trump, they won their elections. Mike Lawler, a moderate, he has said he's willing to move on from Trump, and he encourages the rest of the Republican Party to move on from Trump. Brandon Williams, the same thing. George Santos and Anthony Desposito, in their candidacies, they focused on crime and economy, and the economy throughout the election campaign. In the governor's races, you saw Lee Zeldin performing really well by appealing to suburbanites, to Long Island voters, to upstate New York voters, to Westchester voters, and saying that New York at this point is an economy that's in decline, that needs to be revitalized by stopping crime. And that's a message that worked for voters, and that's a message that we knew all along would have worked. But only New York and only Florida, which is a success for the Republican Party, only those two states really embrace that kind of messaging. And that's how Republicans, with the exception of those two states, performed badly everywhere else. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.